Yeah,
now.
yeah. And I'm going to cut out exactly on time because I have to do actual work at 11.
Oh, forget it.
I'm
Forget
Oh, I
sorry.
have to
I'm
do an
sorry.
NIH. I have to do an
it.
Crucified.
Love
NIH
your
training again at like 11. And I already did this a couple months ago, but they said, well, it might have changed because the orcs
Oh,
keep
yeah.
changing stuff, I
Well,
guess.
we'll move fast. We'll move fast. So we're going to start with an early poem, Mowing. And I'm going to read it to you, and then we're going to talk about why I chose to begin with it. There was never a sound beside the wood but one, and that was my long scythe whispering to the ground. What was it whispered? I knew not well myself. Perhaps it was something about the heat of the sun, something perhaps about the lack of sound. And that was why it whispered and did not speak. It was no dream of the gift of idle hours or easy gold at the hand of fay or elf. Anything more than the truth would have seemed too weak to the earnest love that laid the swale in rows, not without feeble pointed spikes of flowers, pale orchises, and scared a bright green snake. The fact is the sweetest dream that labor knows. My long scythe whispered and left the hay to make. So I wanted to start here because of the line, the fact is the sweetest dream that labor knows. Two of the poems that we're going to talk about today are very much grounded in actual physical labor, namely mending wall and after apple picking. But first of all, just to look at this poem, which was published in A Boy's Will that came out in 1913. So this is a fairly early poem. Frost, everybody says, oh, he started publishing late, but he was like 37 when he brought out his first book, which to me is not terribly late. But anyway, this is more or less a sonnet. And I know that you all know what a sonnet is, a 14-line poem that divides into an octave, which is the first 8 lines, and then a sestet, which is the second 6-line group. And generally, it is written in iambic pentameter, which is a 10-syllable line, the meter of which goes like this, da-dum, 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 da-dum. There are two main kinds of sonnets, and Frost uses both, and he uses variations of both. The first is the Petrarchan sonnet, and the second is the Shakespearean sonnet. This is not quite either kind. So if we look at the rhyme form, the rhyme scheme of a Shakespearean sonnet is A B B A C D D C. I'm going to get it wrong. A B B A C D D C. Wait. This is embarrassing. I should have written it down. But anyway, I'm going to talk about this rhyme scheme. This one rhymes like this: A, B, one ground. Myself is C. Sun goes back to rhyme with one, A. Sound rhymes with ground, B. And then we go to D, and then E, and then C back again, elf rhyming with myself, and then week rhyming with speak, F, rose, flowers rhyming with hours. G is snake. F is nose. And G is make. That's not terribly important, except that it shows us that Frost is really a master at taking a traditional form and improvising with it, changing it out, doing something new and fresh with it. Just so, if a conventional sonnet, a truly regular sonnet, has 10 syllables in the line, this one has 12 and then 10, 12, 13, 10, 11, 11, 11, 12, 11, 10, 10, 11, 11. And if we look at more or less what I think is the structure of it, this one breaks not after the first 8 lines, but after the first 6 lines. So there never was a sound beside the wood but one, and that was my long scythe whispering to the ground. What was it whispered? I knew not well myself. Perhaps it was something about the heat of the sun, something perhaps about the lack of sound, and that was why it whispered and did not speak. And then we have a full stop. And then a kind of reflection upon that. It was no dream of the gift of idle hours. And it goes on toward its conclusion with the final couplet. Couplets, of course, generally end Shakespearean sonnets. And this one has a strong couplet, but this couplet does not rhyme with itself. This couplet has the rhyme FG. The fact is the sweetest dream that labor knows. Period. My long scythe whispered and left the hay to make. So this is a poem that comes from Frost's experiences as a farmer, his experiences involved with manual labor, and the kind of what can I say, hushedness of this scythe, this old-fashioned way of cutting hay, this scythe whispering to the ground. What was it? It whispered. It's like as if it's saying something, but it's not saying something in any language that he knows. And then he gets fanciful, as he'll often do, as he does, especially in birches. Perhaps it was something about the heat of the sun, something perhaps about the lack of sound. That was why it whispered and did not speak. So he's casting a spell here. He's drawing us into this early poem, this early book, and once again emphasizing the physicality of labor, the physicality and the everydayness of what he's writing about. And again, really strong sense of place, really strong sense of meaningful work. So let's zoom on a little bit and let's actually go forward past An Old Man's Winter Night to Mending Wall. Did you put Mending Wall in?
Yeah, it's in there.
Oh, did I pass it?
Uh, I think you
No,
did An Old Man's Winter Night twice and not Mending Wall.
Oh, no.
no,
Well,
I
I-
saw it. It's in there. It's in
It
there.
is.
But
It's in there if you go.
mending wall is right after mowing in mine.
Oh, it
Is-
is?
the
Oh,
next-
no, in yours. But I made a special edit that was supposed to avoid exactly what we're doing right now.
Yeah,
I think I can fix that, though.
I think you can.
Um,
I'll tell you what, while you're fixing it, we'll talk about An Old Man's Winter Night, okay?
okay.
that
Let me
okay?
get back to that. Mm, mm, mm. Oh, geez. Okay, old man's.
There we
There we
go.
go. Okay.
Yeah. An Old Man's Winter Night. All out of doors look darkly in at him through the thin frost, almost in separate stars that gathers on the pane in empty rooms. What kept his eyes from giving back the gaze was the lamp tilted near them in his hand. What kept him from remembering what it was that brought him to that creaking room was age. He stood with barrels round him at a loss, and having scared the cellar under him in clomping there, he scared it once again in clomping off, and scared the outer night, which has its sounds familiar, like the roar of trees and crack of branches, common things, but nothing so like beating on a box. A light he was to no one but himself, where now he sat, concerned with he knew what. A quiet light, and then not even that. He consigned to the moon, such as she was so late arising, to the broken moon as better than the sun in any case. Scroll down. For such a charge, his snow upon the roof, his icicles along the wall to keep, and slept. The log that shifted with a jolt once in the stove disturbed him, and he shifted and eased his heavy breathing, but still slept. One aged man, one man can't fill a house, a farm, a countryside, or if he can, it's thus he does it of a winter night.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I think this is such an eloquent poem.
Can't keep a house.
Well, this is what it was online.
Yeah, but it's another one.
So I'm going to find the page for that so that can I read it without scrolling up and down. Ho, ho, ho. Okay, page 108. So this is from Mountain Interval, which is Frost's third book, published shortly after can't keep a house. Yeah, can't keep a house. Here it is. In any case. Okay, this is published shortly after North of Boston. And it reminds me of the saying in the Bible, don't keep your light under a bushel, let it shine out, because here it is, he's a light to no one but himself, where now he sat. This is a poem about diminishment, like the poem The Oven Bird that asks at the end of it what to make of a diminished thing. This is very much a poem about country, deep country, isolation, remoteness. It's written in blank verse. And it has um it has the
42 when he
picture,
wrote it.
it has the picture of an old man who is awakened by something, who clomps, great word choice there. He clomps in, he's heard something. He comes to a creaking room. He can't remember what it was that woke him. He stands looking around at a loss, and then he clumps off. And Frost again becoming kind of fanciful. He scared the outer night, which has it sounds familiar, like the roar of trees and crack of branches, common things, but nothing so like beating on a box. A light he was to no one but himself, where now he sat, concerned with he knew what, a quiet light. And then not even that. Presumably he goes to sleep again. He's near death. He's at the end of his life. The log that shifted with a jolt once in the stove disturbed him, and he shifted and eased his heavy breathing, but still slept. And then we get this beautiful ending. One aged man, one man, can't feel a house, a farm, a countryside. And I always think back to the Romantic poets and their interest in the close relationship between the human and the other than human world. And the idea of, caretaking, the idea of reciprocity and being at home in the other than human world. But here we have this man just it's so naturally described at the end of his life, not really able to think clearly, responding to physical stimuli, sleeping, waking, sleeping by himself in the middle of deep countryside. That's it. How can he keep house with all of its implications? And if you've read Marilyn Robinson's novel Housekeeping, the central activity of human beings, keeping house, keeping a structure that protects us and shelters us from the natural world, that gives us a sense of family and identity. But here, this housekeeping is, pretty much dwindling into nothingness. So I want to comment on either of these first two comments before we move to Mending Wall.
I do think it matters that he says one man can't keep a house, because the point is that he can't fully take care of the house.
And he can't
Filling
hang
the
on to it.
house suggests that the house is empty and that there should be a lot of people in it, which is really not Frost's way of thinking or feeling, and is really irrelevant to what the poem has shown
Yeah,
us.
I think it matters too. So I'm working with, sources online, and sometimes they're a little bit inaccurate, but also can't keep a house. It's like with the larger meaning of housekeeping. He can't keep it. He can't hang on to it. It's going to be gone soon. Douglas.
Yeah, I have a cat.
I see your cat, a black cat.
I'm not okay.
Cat and a dog. My gosh.
So the thing that got me, and one of the things that got me, was how he describes the sound of the roar of the trees, because in the winter in New England, the woods sound very different from the summer woods. because
Huh.
the leaves are gone from the trees and they just howl when the wind is blowing. And so that sound, I really understand what he's talking about when he talks about that sound.
So would that be like beating on a box?
No,
His
it's a roar.
Yeah.
No, and the also the branches creak and crack and
Yeah.
squeal when they rub against each other.
Yeah.
And the house creaks too. This is a
Oh
real
yeah.
house and a really old man. Our house creaks. And you know what else? Bamboo creaks when it's growing.
Yes.
Hear it. You can hear it grow. Bill, was your hand up?
Yeah, I thought it's interesting. Apparently, this was published when he was 42.
Mhm.
To me, that's interesting because thinking for myself, when I was 42, I wasn't thinking about some of these things. And it's mind-boggling that he's got himself in that place.
That's interesting. Of course, he's in rural New England, and there probably, don't you think, would be a lot of old people living back,
alone.
Alone in the woods someplace, just like in Mississippi. There's a lot of grandmas and great grandmas and great grandpas tucked away in off these little dirt roads and so on, but that's really interesting. Yeah, because he is himself pretty young, but
Yeah.
but obviously aware of, aged people around him. Douglas.
I think Laurel was next.
Oh, okay, sorry. Oh, Laurel, yeah, sorry.
Just thinking, I think it matters that it's winter because in a rural setting, there's not a lot to do. He has to maintain, keep the fire going,
Yeah.
and he has something, probably apples in those barrels, but he's not out doing farm work. He's alone in this house, and um, he has to keep the fire going, stay warm, and it's cold and dark outside. So I
Yeah.
think it adds to the sense of isolation, and uh, it's not just keeping house that he's not doing. It's sort of everything around. The icicles and the snow tend to themselves, really.
Yeah.
He leaves them to the rest of the outside world to take care of itself, and just stays locked in himself, really, inside this
Yeah.
shell of snow and ice.
It's such a great picture of diminishment and old age, which hasn't really been written all that much about in poetry. Obviously, sure, it's been written about, but this is really just a kind of different territory to explore.
I mean, his own father died when he was very young, so he didn't have the chance to say what
Right,
his parents,
right.
people around him.
Yeah, Peter?
I think there's a little bit of false pathos in talking about this as the end of life, because there's no sign that the old man is actually feeble or sick, let alone dying. He could be 60 and he could be doing this most winter nights for the next 30 years. And that in itself has something grim about it that is not really pathetic, but it is kind of grim.
Yeah. Barry?
Douglas and Leslie were before me.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Everybody wants to talk. That's cool.
Yeah.
So whichever order you stuck your hand up, okay? I've lost track.
So, okay, I'll go. It just makes me think of I had chimney sweeping customers who were only the second owner of the house, and the house had been built in probably the late 1700s or very early 1800s. It was this huge arc of an old house, and the owners had never had enough money to modernize it, which would have really just, usually screws it up. But it had one pipe coming in, and when that would freeze in the winter, there was an old granite paver lined well outside the kitchen door. And the last occupant of the original owners was an elderly woman who died with her feet up on the fender next to the wood stove to keep warm. And So it definitely happens. And that wasn't even far out in the woods. That was just an old house with two adjoined barns. And that was in the 1980s.
Wow, that's cool. That's amazing. Leslie.
Well, first of all, thank you, Doug, because having never worked in the East, it's good to get those insights about what
Yeah.
it's really like. I was thinking about several things, but one of them was just, I mean, I could commiserate with this guy walking into this room and he doesn't know why he's there.
Yeah.
I mean, all things I
We all
know.
can.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all can.
But also, it seems like the house has so many terms of personification. He's scaring the seller and stuff like that, that it's sort of like a companion, but it's also sort of like his double, like it's him. He can't keep a house, sort of like Shakespeare talking about the house is your body. What is it? I think it's Sonnet 146. Why paintest thou thy house so costly gay? The whole sonnet's about your body is your house, and he uses that comparison. And this guy, the house is personified, but it's also like he's living with it, but he's living in it. He scares the seller.
Mhm.
It was an interesting relationship.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. He has a kind of relationship with the moon too, the late rising broken moon, similar kind of intimacy. Barry.
My comment is similar to what Leslie was talking about. What I noticed in these poems is a lot of, he's in these settings where there's not a lot happening. They're empty and kind of lonely places, and he's anthropomorphizing nature, whether it's the bird or that flies behind the wood pile or whatever it may be. And it seems like it reminds me a little of Emily Dickinson again, because he's chosen to be in a very sort of empty, or not empty, but lonely, kind of isolated place. And so he's ruminating about his human and emotional things, using nature as a way of talking about them.
Yeah, a lot of critics kind of early on would say, oh, Frost was avoiding things by not writing about the city, not living in the city. As somebody who's really interested in eco poetry, I see that really differently. I think that Frost is in a world that's very, very full. It's just not necessarily full of other human beings or built structures. But he's a really great poet about capturing this sense of place and the sense of kind of the fullness of life, which is not human life in
Yeah.
place. Let's move on, okay? Shall we talk about Mending Wall a little bit? Which is the first poem in North of Boston. And if you publish books of poems, you know that what you put first is super important. So Frost is kind of staking some territory here. This is the book that made him famous. Mending Wall. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen groundswell under it and spills the upper boulders in the sun and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. The work of hunters is another thing. I have come after them and made repair where they have left not one stone on a stone, but they would have the rabbit out of hiding to please the yelping dogs. The gaps, I mean, no one has seen them made or heard them made, but at spring mending time we find them there. I let my neighbor know beyond the hill, and on a day we meet to walk the line and set the wall between us once again. We keep the wall between us as we go, to each the boulders that have fallen to each. And some are loaves, and some so nearly balls we have to use a spell to make them balance. Stay where you are until our backs are turned. We wear our fingers rough with handling them. Oh, just another kind of outdoor game, one on a side. It comes to little more.
Hmm.
There where it is, we do not need the wall. He is all pine. and I am apple orchard. My apple trees will never get across and eat the cones under his pines, I tell him. He only says, good fences make good neighbors. Spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows? But here there are no cows. Before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down. I could say elves to him, but it's not elves exactly, and I'd rather he said it for himself. I see him there, bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand, like an old stone savage armed. He moves in darkness, as it seems to me, not of woods only and the shade of trees. He will not go behind his father's saying, and he likes having thought of it so well, he says again, good fences make good neighbors. So I think this is a really complicated poem. You know, when I was taught it in junior high, it was sort of like, well, the man who's speaking is somebody who understands that, something there is that doesn't love a wall, that there shouldn't be walls between people, that nature itself wants to knock the walls down and so on and so forth. And the other man, who's the old stone savage armed, just thinks good fences make good neighbors. And that's the easiest reading of this poem, as if there's an easy kind of antithesis between the two points of view. But we remember Frost says free verse is like playing tennis without a net. That is, there's no game if there's not a net. And what the net does is it creates a wall between one side and another side, right? So this is not free verse. This is blank verse, which Shakespeare called Marlowe's mighty line, unrhymed iambic pentameter. And Frost uses blank verse a lot, right? And he's just a master of blank verse. So blank verse itself, and if we look at the shape, just eyeball the shape of this poem on the page, it has a wall shape to it. It's straight up and down. It's very regular. So we have also the fact that Richard Poirier makes in a really good book about Frost that the speaker is the one who reminds the neighbor that it's time to mend the wall. He says, I let my neighbor know beyond the hill, and on a day we meet to walk the line and set the wall between us once again. So it's like, well, what the heck is he doing if he says something there is that doesn't love a wall? And then later he says, why do we need a wall? My apple trees are not going to get across and mess with your pine trees. We don't have cows, something that would actually need a wall. And yet there's this equivocal embrace of creating and maintaining the wall, you know? So I guess I just think it's such a, as I say, such a equivocating poem, but in a good way, not a bad way. It's like we do need walls. We do build walls. We do build structures that divide this from that. What would there be if there were not structures? There would not be, edges of cells, edges of houses, edges of bodies. And yet at the same time, there's this deep creating nature in the earth itself, this deep burgeoning springtime that destroys structures, that arises from the, deep, deep kind of bowels of the earth, to send the frozen groundswell under the wall and spill the upper boulders in the sun. Another interesting thing too is New England, which I've been in but haven't lived there, of course, is a place of walls that are built without mortar. So that takes incredible skill to build a wall that'll, hold by just knowing the shapes of the stones and how to fit them together to build a wall without gluing them in place, cementing them in place. So there's just, I think, so much to think about in this amazing poem. Douglas?
Yeah, one of the things about the walls that are all over the place in New England is they had to do something with the stones
Yeah.
that the frost would force up out of the ground. And every year there were new stones.
Yeah.
And so they would stack them as boundary. And they, in the old New England, they had, there was a town office called the fence viewer. And the fence viewer would go around and make sure all the property lines were intact.
Yes.
And the frost, heaves underneath the walls as well as everywhere else. And that's the something that doesn't love a wall.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so cool about the fence viewer. That's pretty cool. Yeah, absolutely. In order to farm, you've got to get rid of the stones. So what are you going to do with the stones? You're going to build walls, you know? Otis.
Yeah, I think that I'm also in New England. I'm in Saratoga Springs, and we have the same phenomenon. In the country roads, every lot is bordered by a stone wall, which are the stones that were dug up. And there's a big new house going up near Skidmore, and they've been excavating the patch, and there's this huge pile of stones there, and it's really a phenomenon. And I always growing up, this is one of the most famous poetic lines. There are two very famous poetic lines here. Something doesn't love a wall, and good fences make good neighbors. And I think the latter is the one that is most often quoted. And it is kind of I don't know, kind of a Trumpian thing, that I've got rules, and I'm not going to, my father taught me these rules, and I'm not going to forsake these rules. I'm not going to think about them too much. And the poet is kind of being mischievous in his approach to that, his response
Yeah.
to that.
That's really interesting. Yeah. Laurel.
I was going to echo both of the previous people about the walls in New England, and even when people have abandoned farming and abandoned the area, I used to walk through the woods, and you'd find these old bits of walls that people had used to clear the fields.
Yeah.
And the walls are still there, the remnants of them, but I think it's also something that was carried from England, because you can go all over England, and in fact Ireland, where Dan's mother is from, in the fields people left in Galway, or many of them left during the famine. There's still old stone cottages and stone walls. Stone walls last a long time, and it is a special skill. And there are people who teach other people how to build walls. The balancing of the stones is a real art. So I was the other thing that struck me is that he could mend the wall himself, but it's a tradition that they do it together.
Yeah.
And that's sort of interesting, that it's not something that he goes out and just fixes his side of the wall or fixes the wall. He does it as a shared task.
Absolutely. So they're both not creating a wall and creating a wall at the same time. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
By doing it together, they're reaching across that wall, and yet by doing it, they're erecting the wall. Yeah. Barry.
I got the impression not so much that the writer was, advocating preparing the wall, but that this was something that was done traditionally every year, and that he just had to sort of agree with his neighbor when they were going to do it. But he also acknowledges that walls can have a constructive purpose. If there were cows, that would be a good reason to have a wall. So I think what I get from this, and I kind of echoing what Otis said, I thought about tariffs and as walls, and I like the line about when putting up a wall, it might be useful to think about what you're walling in and what you're walling out, which I thought was really, that's to me the profound thought in this poem.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, any poem walls things in and walls things out. Any poem has to have a structure. It doesn't have to be blank verse, but it has to exclude a whole lot more than it includes. You know what I mean? Leslie?
So, we do have walls in Chico. We call them Chinese. They're Chinese walls, but it's actually they were built by early Portuguese shepherds, And we had the
You
eruption.
can translate into Portuguese and many other languages in Translate.
Uh,
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, so much for
Sorry.
Anyway, so we have volcanic, the east side of town's all volcanic, and they had to gather up these things to make the walls. But I've been thinking a lot about barriers and walls lately, because I guess Trumpian walls, but other things. And I was thinking about, first of all, walls are definitions. They're putting a boundary around something to define what that area represents and perhaps who it belongs to. But I've been thinking about different people's reactions to our political situation now, and just to how they view their lives in general, because I found there were a lot of people who are very, very willing to be close to their very small personal tribe.
Mhm.
When it comes to the bigger tribe of the world, they want a wall. They don't want to let in those unknown things. And there's all that stuff about reptilian brains. I'm thinking about the Neanderthal here, bringing his Stone Age rocks with him. But the early need for defining who was in and who was not in your group so that you
Mhm.
could survive. But how in a more modern age, really, it seems to me like maturity is this sort of, I don't know if you would call it Zen or whatever, but letting go of things that separate the I from the thou,
Fine, but
you sort of merge with, you recognize yourself in others and others in yourself. And when I was taught this poem really early in my life, I remember being confused because my teacher said, "Oh no, the Frostian narrator is the good guy. He understands we don't need walls, and the other
Yeah.
guy is the bad guy." And I thought, it doesn't seem quite that way to me.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Brian.
Um, Robert Frost was part of an literary exchange program with the Soviet Union, and his reading of this poem in Moscow after the raising of the Berlin Wall was considered quite the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's such an interesting poem to think, it's one of those poems that you read in junior high and you think, oh, that's easy, because it's so straightforward. It's a straightforward narrative. It's written in the ordinary language that people use. And then you start looking closely at it and you start thinking about like y'all are doing, what we wall in, what we keep out, what we can let go of as far as erecting walls. Um, and it just gets more and more and more complicated the more we look at it. And Frost's own mixed feelings, it seems to me, are what's really interesting about this poem. That the speaker is the one who initiates keeping that wall going at the same time as he's the one who's questioning the need for the wall, you know, and understanding that they're doing something based on what nature does, throwing up the rocks, but also contra nature because nature would cast the wall down.
Those walls were built because they had to get all the rocks
Yeah, that's what
out of the
Douglas was saying.
fields. Yeah. But they're beautiful. And I think without his saying that, he likes the way they look. He likes them to be, more or less fixed up.
Yeah,
And I think to him, it is just a kind of outdoor game.
yeah. So let's go on to after apple picking because a couple of you have to leave at one, and this is, to my mind, probably Frost's absolutely most beautiful poem.
Hmm.
After apple picking, my long two-pointed ladders sticking through a tree toward heaven still, and there's a barrel that I didn't fill beside it, and there may be 2 or 3 apples I didn't pick upon some bough, but I am done with apple picking now. Essence of winter sleep is on the night, the scent of apples. I am drowsing off. I cannot rub the strangeness from my sight I got from looking Through a pane of glass I skimmed this morning from the drinking trough and held against the world of hoary grass. It melted, and I let it fall and break. But I was well upon my way to sleep before it fell, and I could tell what form my dreaming was about to take. Magnified apples appear and disappear, stem end and blossom end, and every fleck of russet showing clear. My instep arch not only keeps the ache, it keeps the pressure of a ladder round. I feel the ladder sway as the boughs bend. And I keep hearing from the cellar bin the rumbling sound of load on load of apples coming in. For I have had too much of apple picking. I am overtired of the great harvest I myself desired.
That's pretty.
There were 10,000 fruit to touch, cherish in hand, lift down and not let fall. For all that struck the earth, no matter if not bruised or spiked with stubble, went surely to the cider apple heap as of no worth. One can see what will trouble this sleep of mine, whatever sleep it is. Were he not gone, the woodchuck could say whether it's like his long sleep, as I describe its coming on, or just some human sleep. This is a lyric, and the whole thing is as if it's passing in a dream, a waking, dreaming state. He says, even in the morning, I'm looking for the page so that I can read.
To find it.
Let me just give half a second here. Okay, page 68. Sorry, guys. Here we go. Yeah, he says, I cannot rub the strangeness from my sight I got from looking through a pane of glass I skimmed this morning from a drinking trough and held against the world of hoary grass. It melted and I let it fall and break. So there's this, film in front of his vision as if you're looking through a pane of ice. But then he says, but I was well upon my way to sleep before it fell. Already waking is to fall into this dreaming. And we've got this triple rhyme that's very, really beautiful and unusual in poetry. Well, fell, tell. And I could tell what form my dreaming was about to take. So as if the whole day that has passed has been spent in labor. The fact is the sweetest dream that labor knows. This labor, which is like a dream, and which is like a dream in that the whole thing is passing in a kind of dream vision. Now, does this poem rhyme? Yes, it does. This poem is very fluid in its form. The line lengths are fluid. They go from a bit long to 4 syllables, I was well and could tell, and then 2 syllables, for all that struck the earth, 4 syllables, as of no worth. So it's a very fluid, sinuous kind of form, like dreaming. It's not staunch like mending wall, but it does rhyme. And here's the rhyme scheme. It's crazy. A, B, B, A, C, C, D, E, D, F, E, F, G, H, 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 G, I, J, I, G, K, J, L, K, L, M, N, N, M, O, O, P, Q, R, P, Q, S, T, S, T, R. Everything rhymes with something, but it's not held together by a strict rhyme scheme. So the rhyme itself is sinuous. It's like water flowing or like dreaming. Do you know? Now, even though in this dream, even though this is kind of a dream, it's a very tactile dream. You've got amazing lines like, my instep arch not only keeps the ache, it keeps the pressure of a ladder round. that's so grounded in the body. You know, the way if you're standing on a ladder, sooner or later, your foot in the instep starts to feel that pressure of the ladder round. And then the carefulness, the precise carefulness of um, there were 10,000 fruit to touch, cherish in hand, lift down, and not let fall. For all that struck the earth, no matter if not bruised or striked with stubble, went surely to the cider apple heap as of no worth. This is a poem, it's a post-lapsarian poem. And, you know, people, different critics put pressure on this to different degrees. I put pressure on it not terribly strongly, but we've got the beginning, my long two-pointed ladder sticking through a tree toward heaven still, right? And anytime you have a poem in the Judeo-Christian tradition that's all about apples, you have to think about Eden. You have to think about, you know, the original sin. So this is a poem that is in that post-lapsarian world, and yet it's not pressing on that too hard. It's a poem that's firmly grounded in this world, in the cherishing and the carefulness and the physicality and the kind of tenderness and the beauty of this world, and also the in-betweenness. It's like this is a realm where sleep will follow.
Hello.
Will it be a human sleep? Will it be a hibernation? That's a joke. Will it be death? Just some human sleep? That could be another way to look at that too, you know? But all of these things are sort of not exactly floating, but shifting and gliding around in this incredibly, incredibly beautiful, amazing poem. So that's my quick quick take on this poem. Yeah, Bill.
When a really able poet sits down to write, someone like Frost, is he thinking of the structure that he ends up with, or is it something that just comes?
I think that's a good question. I think it's like if it didn't come naturally, it wouldn't come. Do you know? You can't plan to have this kind of incredibly complicated structure. I think the poem, I don't know if the poem, you know, was written slowly. I imagine it wasn't written that slowly. Um, who was it said about Shakespeare? If he had to work hard to do it, he wouldn't have been able to do it, you know? And I think this is just a poetic genius at work here, creating a spell, creating a spell for himself as the writer of this poem.
I read somewhere that Frost wrote the poem that he couldn't read at the inauguration the night before the inauguration. Is
Yeah.
that realistic that he could sit down and create a poem like that in one evening?
It is realistic. It's totally realistic. Some of the really amazing poems in the world got written really fast. Like if you guys want to find an amazing poem, look up Chidiock Tichborne, Tichbourne. He was a 21-year-old who was beheaded the next day in the Tower of London. And he wrote this amazing, amazing poem the night before his death. Chidiock, Chiddiock, I think it is. And then the last name, Tichbourne. So, you know, yeah, some great poems get written really fast. Some great poems take many, many, many years. Barry.
You know, I was noticing some of the rhymes, and there's a few lines that have end rhyme that have similar philosophical content. Like let me see if I can clarify this, because he's talking about the apples and that are spiked with stubble, and that rhymes with the line, one can see what will trouble this sleep of mine. So he's got this bruised apple, not, being eaten, but dumped to the cider heap, and his sleep is troubled. And, was it troubled with stubbled apples? And then he rhymes, there's another one that's like that too. He rhymes, went surely to the cider apple heap, rhymes with, or just some human sleep.
Right.
So those rhymes are all about, do I have meaning? Does this apple have meaning? It's bruised. No wonder I'm having trouble sleep. What kind of sleep is this? And
Yeah.
it seems like he used the rhymes to pull you back into his thought process. At least for me, that's how it felt.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. Barry and then Leslie.
I thought he captured in this poem perfectly something that I experience a lot, which is because I'm usually reading before I go off to sleep or catching up with words with friends or something. And whatever it is I was thinking about as I drift off does sort of color the dreams that I have. And particularly when you're doing something repetitive, like apple picking, which had to be a pretty tedious process, being up there picking those hundreds and hundreds of apples day after day. I would think that those would clearly come into play in his dreams that at night, which I just thought he captured that really well.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. Leslie.
When I got to the part about I cannot rub the strangeness from my sight I got from looking through a pane of glass I skimmed this morning from the drinking trough. That seems like a division of an important thing that happened that takes you from this one world where he is busy, busy, busy doing this task to where he suddenly is in a different world. And it reminded me of a poem by Yeats. It's called The Collarbone of a Hare, which calls upon the druidical world where he picks up a collarbone of a hare and he looks through the hole. And they had a lot of Celtic beliefs about stones with holes in them, and you look through them into the other world. And, he's got this very transient thing, this pane of ice that's going to fall and break and everything. But it seems from that point, I mean, it might have, you can say apples are all the apples of Eden, but also there's the golden apples of the sun,
Yeah.
And this to me seemed very much that this was a step across a threshold into a whole different way of how he felt about being done with apple picking now and thinking about what kind of a sleep is it that's coming.
That's really cool. It's really a mythic kind of poem, That's really cool. Otis. Otis?
Sorry, I don't know if commercial apple orchards are like this, but I've got a couple trees in my yard. And at this time of year, if you're walking in the area, there's this intoxicating smell of fermenting apples, the ones that have fallen to the ground before you could pick them. And I wonder if that has some bearing on his state of mind. That just a little bit of a hallucination because of the aroma and possibly becoming intoxicated with the apples on the ground.
Well, he did write a poem about a cow getting drunk by eating fermented apples. Yeah. Douglas?
Yeah, it's not only the cows that sometimes the bears will get drunk on the fallen apples. And now even in our yard, we have two ancient apple trees, and there's a lot of yellow jackets that are getting their last few meals off the apples.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And some people also say that Frost is in a way obliquely referring to his own poetry when he says, I am overtired of the by myself. And that goes back to talking about apple picking, but that can refer to just the creative process itself, You desire a great harvest. You set out to have this great harvest. You physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally tired. You enter this dreamlike state. Yeah.
And getting the cider drops and then you have to do something with them or they'll rot. So
Yeah.
then you've got to go and press your cider.
Which is another whole huge job. Yeah. Right. Any other comments? You guys are great.
I have a comment about the history of rhyme schemes. Do we know, first of all, free verse and blank verse, when did they begin to be used, number one? And uh, secondly, it seems to me that going back a long ways, rhymes were used to help memorize sagas and uh, you know, before there was writing even, people would have, so there's a theory that songs predate language, really, that chants and so forth. Uh, and so the rhyme scheme that was used primitively was specifically probably pretty simple in order to aid the memorization of the saga or the song. And so anyway, do you want to comment on that, Anne? It's not something I know much about.
Yeah, sure. Blank verse really came into being in the Renaissance with Christopher Marlowe, with his plays Tamburlaine and Tamburlaine Part Two. And then Shakespeare, of course, picks it up and runs with it. So blank verse is really different from free verse. Blank verse is unrhymed iambic pentameter. So it's got that, 10 syllable iambic metrical rhythm, ba-dum, 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 with variations. Free verse really came into existence. Look at Whitman. He's an early practitioner of free verse. Free verse is unrhymed, non-metrical poetry. So the bases of free verse are the line and the sentence. And you can see Frost, playing. Frost doesn't write free verse, but you can very much see him playing the line against the sentence, right? And you can see Whitman playing the line against the sentence. So that's where a lot of the kind of tension and beauty of free verse comes in, is the way a poet can mm, shape a poem in which there it's made of sentences, more or less. It can be fragments, it can be single words, but that sentence is being played off against the line somehow. Yeah, Laurel.
I wonder how much of this was inherited from Greek and Latin structure, which was not based on emphasis but scansion. If anyone else, I never had classical Greek, but I had a lot of Latin, and one of the things you had to do was read things like Ovid and work out the scan of long and short syllables, and there were rules.
He's
Um,
going to talk about that because he knows more about that than I do.
Well, I think it was Ezra Pound who said Frost was really a really good Latinist and not at all a show off about it. So the possibility that he's influenced by Latin verse is quite likely. I don't think he knew Greek, though. I could be wrong.
but even the earlier poets, I think, also
Yeah,
were scholars in knowing
sure.
Latin, and I'm guessing they all had to do scansion at some point in their studies, because my Latin teacher was a classicist
Yeah,
who made us do, the scanning. You probably had to do it too when you
yeah.
read Ovid or whatever.
And he writes one poem in hendecasyllabics, which is a very difficult
Yeah.
meter, no rhyme. The poem is called For Once Then Something, and it's a great poem, but it's really difficult to do
Yeah,
hendecasyllabics
we'll
in
get to
English and
there. We'll get
sound
to there.
like you
Yeah.
are speaking English.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we get to Marianne Moore, we'll look at what's it called? Syllables.
Syllabic verse.
Syllabic verse. So yeah, these poets, some of them are really highly influenced. And of course, T.S. Eliot was totally versed in Latin and Sanskrit. But anyway, yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. There are whole books written about the history of prosody, the history of metrical patterns, and so on. Any other comments? Okay, guys, thank you.
Thank you.
I will send an email about some poems that I want to look at next time, okay? And we'll take 2 more days to talk about Frost. It's nice to see all your faces now. That's the only thing I don't like about screen sharing is I can't see you. But anyway, yeah. Have a good few days.
See you
Bye.
soon. Bye, folks.
Thanks, Al.
Bye.
Bye.
NIH.